So we knew we needed to build a plane that was capable of overflying Russia and take photographs. Well, the Air Force refused to do it. General LeMay, there was no way that he was going to build a plane that didn't drop bombs or shoot guns. And he certainly wasn't going to build a plane with one engine. And so Eisenhower, he said, well, we're going to have a plane. So and then Eisenhower got to thinking about it. He said, well, we don't want any military people flying over Russia anyway, because they get shot down, so it would be an act of war. So they gave the CIA the job of building the U-2 plane, which we ended up building. We had several other companies that competed for the contract, but Lockheed U-2 was the one that won out, and that's how the CIA become the one to be flying the U-2.
Tonight, Area 51, NASA and the CIA. T.D. Barnes is in the studio, and he's going to tell us about Project Palladium, Oxcart, and Soviet MiGs at Groom Lake. This is My Alien Life.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
My Alien Life is recorded live from atop the Northern Rocky Mountains and is available on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, and everywhere fine podcasts are found. My website is at www.myalienlifepodcast.com. There you will find my email address, all previously recorded shows, and more. I am Cameron Brower. This is My Alien Life, and the podcast starts right now.
My Alien Life Podcast.
Three, two, one, zero, and liftoff.
My guest tonight is a veteran of the U.S. Army and a prolific author of a library of books, and he has had a distinguished career serving NASA with its X-15 lifting body and the CIA's A-12. He's probably remembered by many of my listeners for his time spent at Area 51, which was just a stepping stone in a stellar career serving America. Mr. T.D. Barnes, thank you for your service, and thank you for being on the program.
Well, thank you, Cam. Appreciate being on your program.
T.D., you have authored a library of amazing books. Where do you find the time to write during a career that keeps you moving in so many directions?
Oh, I'm a fast writer, but it's just something I love to do, and there's been such a demand for it because so little was known about what we did back during my era, and so it became very popular. So I don't watch TV much. I just love to write, and once you get started, I won't quit.
Let's start in 1960 and talk about how you were involved with the Palladium flights that tested Soviet technology in Cuba.
Yeah, that was a very interesting program. They were going to build the CIA was going to build the A-12 to replace the U-2 because they never expected the U-2 to have a life of over 18 months. They figured it'd be shot down 18 months to 2 years, and sure enough, that's just about what happened when Gary Powers got shot down. So they started planning well ahead of time to replace it, and they were replacing it with a Mach 3 Blackbird A-12. And the CIA got wind that the Russians had a new radar, and they were picking up reflections off of ICBMs flying inside of Russia at their test range. And they're trying to figure out, the capabilities. And the Russians, fortunately for us, moved on to Cuba in 1960. This is long before the missile crisis, mind you. They were moving in troops, and we knew this. They moved in troops and equipment, and the radar was included. So the CIA and NSA was flying a ghost plane, the C-97, out of Biggs Air Force Base at El Paso, and they'd take a run at Cuba and get them to turn this radar on. And I was still in the Army at the time. I was well advanced into surface air missiles and radar, this sort of thing. And so they recruited me to go on a couple of the ghost flights. And what we'd do is head toward Cuba, because they were very paranoid, the Russians were, because Castro thought the United States would invade just any day. So they turned on this radar, and we would electronically answer the radar, and we could make it think it was tracking one plane, 2 planes, 10 planes, 20. They'd go coming, going, whatever we wanted to do. And what we did is make them turn up their power and see just how far out they could track and this sort of thing. And what we determined was, yes, they would be able to shoot down the A-12 when we got it built. And consequently, we never flew another flight after Gary Power got shut down. Never flew another plane over Russia, because we knew they had that capability. What was interesting about Palladium is we put a big antenna right off at the turnpike at Morgantown, New Jersey, and aimed it at the moon. And within 30 days, we had pinpointed every tall king radar site inside of Russia, which was kind of interesting little thing that we did back in those days.
So at that time, we did know that the U-2 spy plane was capable of being shot down, even the first few missions that it had?
Yes, we knew it all along. The Russians were using the very same radar that we were using on the X-15 program, identical. And this was a radar that we had given the Russians during World War II during the Lend-Lease program. And we knew its capability because on the NASA high range where I was working, it was a 40-mile range radar originally, and we had modified it where we could track a beacon 400 miles instead of 40. And we knew if we could do it, the Russians do the same thing. And so it's just a matter of time. Because what the Russians tracked every U-2 plane that ever flew over Russia with track radar. This was very surprising to us that it could. But the limitation was the range, and particularly when we built the A-12. With the old radar they had, the problem was by the time they detected the plane flying over, it was flying so fast that they didn't have time to energize their missiles and shoot at us. They'd shoot at us all the time, but they couldn't catch it. Like a sonic boom. By the time they saw us, we were gone.
So were these surface-to-air missiles that they had set up just for this purpose?
It was part of the air defense. They had a lot of SA-2 missiles. Russia had sealed off its borders. The Cold War was very hot in those days. After World War II, we went into the Cold War, and this takes us to why we built the U-2. That's when they closed off the Iron Curtain. We were trying to figure out what they were doing, because the Russians were bragging that they had more bombers, they had more missiles, and we started to believe them, because one morning we woke up and Sputnik was beeping in the air above us. They had put the first satellite into space, and then they put the first man into space. So we didn't know what capabilities they had. So we were trying to we'd fly planes, Air Force planes, inside of Russia trying to take photographs. And by the time before we ever built the U-2, we'd already lost 200 people shot down inside of Russia trying to figure out what they were doing. So we knew we needed to build a plane that was capable of overflying Russia and take photographs. Well, the Air Force refused to do it. General LeMay, there was no way that he was going to build a plane that didn't drop bombs or shoot guns. And he certainly wasn't going to build a plane with one engine. And so Eisenhower, he said, well, we're going to have a plane. So and then Eisenhower got to thinking about it. He said, well, we don't want any military people flying over Russia anyway, because they get shot down. It's it'd be an act of war. So they gave the CIA the job of building the U-2 plane, which we ended up building. We had several other companies that competed for the contract, but Lockheed U-2 was the one that won out, and that's how the CIA become the one to be flying the U-2.
I was always aware of the Soviet Union having a missile defense for planes. Did the U.S. have anything that paralleled that? Did we have any missile defense system for incoming Soviet planes?
Oh, much better.
Oh, really?
That was when I came out of Korea. I was Army intelligence in Korea. I had a 2-star general for Godfather. He's one that said, "Son, you need to get out of intelligence to get into electronics," because surface air missiles was a new thing that we were doing. So my first school was a year and a half on the Nike Ajax. And the time I got out of school, it was already obsolete. They had the Nike Hercules, and so I went to another school, a year and a half school of that, and ended up going to activate actually with the Hawk missile unit. But we had very superior air defenses than Russia did. That's something to think about. We overflew Russia. Can you imagine if they had been flying over the United States? We would have gone berserk.
Oh, absolutely. So, what were the placement or where were the placement of our missile defenses for flyovers from Russia aircraft?
Oh, we had them all over on the dew line. Had a lot of them in Alaska because the dew line was the radar system we had up there. But we had Nike sites in just about every state, New York, you name it. We had Nike sites scattered all over the United States and around our boundaries.
So at that particular time in our history, were they also thinking about missile defense systems for ICBMs?
Yes. Actually the Nike Hercules could handle ICBM. They still use that missile even today for some of the projects where they're shooting down anti-missiles, shooting down other incoming ICBMs or something. They've used the Nike Hercules for some of those tests, and they've used it for some surface-to-air tests. And then the radar is still used today extensively. We had it out of Area 51. That's our primary radar, and they still use the Nike radar. We got them scattered all over Nevada for the different programs that we have here for red flag and green flag and that sort of thing.
At this time when you were involved with Palladium, high altitude planes, what exactly did they mean during the U.S. Cold War? How instrumental were they?
The original radar couldn't track over a plane that's over, say, 30, 35, 40,000 feet altitude. They just didn't have the capability. And so everybody thought that we'd fly over, 50,000 feet, that they couldn't shoot us down. But and as almost the case, the first U-2 flights, they couldn't shoot us down. But then they advanced enough. They did get lucky with Gary Powers, and it was a lucky shot. In fact, they shot down one of their own planes at the same time they shot him down. But they weren't that capable at that time. But mostly it's your handicap was your radar. It wasn't really the missiles. You just didn't have the technology with the radar at that time. But we were advancing so quickly, and the Tall King radar was a very effective radar.
Speaking of the A-12, where did it take off, and how long could it stay up there?
We flew 2,850 missions out of Area 51 alone with the A-12, and a normal flight, well, it depends on how, you can fly all day long, but every few minutes you're fueling up. It held 80,000 pounds of fuel, which is 11,000 gallons, and it burned about, I think, 700 gallons of. Oh, I mean, it's your gas off. It hauls the fuel weight so much the plane couldn't take off loaded. It take off with about a quarter tank of fuel, and then immediately hook up with a tanker. And then on a mission, we'd have tankers scattered all over the route, whatever route they were taking, and they would fuel, maybe 3 or 4, maybe even 5 times they would fuel up on a mission.
So, and again, how long was approximate flight time? I mean, how long would a pilot expect to be in there on a mission?
I think about 6 hours, about the longest. It was only in the A-12. The U-2 is in there longer, but the A-12, they get the job done quick. They can fly at 3,000 miles or 2,200 miles an hour. It didn't take long to get someplace. And the biggest handicap was, we flew 29 operational missions during the Vietnam War, and was flying out of Kadena while we're rotating people to Kadena, the crews, and we had 3 planes there. And the one problem we had is flying to turn that sucker around at 2,200 miles an hour. The minimum you could turn around was 85 miles. circle. And most of them about 125 miles. Well, Vietnam is a very narrow country, and we had problems places we couldn't go because you couldn't turn around without flying into China or someplace. So we had some handicaps in that respect.
Was Area 51 the return, the home base when it was returning?
It returned to Kadena, Okinawa, while we was flying over Southeast Asia, and we flew three flights over North Korea. When they seized the USS Pueblo, one of our pilots named Jack Weeks, him and Frank Murray were on duty at the time at Kadena. So Jack flew over in North Korea, and he actually found the Pueblo. The North Koreans had seized it and their crew, and they kept the crew for over a year. But he found the ship, and then the Secretary of Defense. We're wondering, are we at war, or is it just an incident? So Frank Murray flew the second flight 2 weeks later, and he made about 3 sachets across North Korea, and we won't admit to it, but we think he flew into China to see if they were mobilizing for war. Or are we at war, or we just got a laundry bunch of North Koreans that are playing games with us, and that's what it turned out to be.
So basically, the aircraft would take off from Area 51, and its path was from east to west, and then it would fly down to Asia.
No, it actually the three were stationed at Kadena. We didn't fly Asia from Area 51. We rotated our people, but we just had the 3 planes. And a normal flight out of Area 51, we'd take off and we'd head north up to almost to the Idaho state line, perhaps, and then depending on what the kind of flight it was, then we'd turn, maybe go to Albuquerque, and then turn and head out over the Pacific Ocean off of Point Magoo, and that sort of a flight. We just had kind of a circular. What we're trying to do is avoid populated areas. First of all, we didn't want anyone to know we had the plane, even our own Air Force. And so we tried to avoid populated areas, and this is kind of funny, at Mark III, we could leave a very good sonic boom. And anytime we'd happen to do that and break some windows or something, the Air Force at Fallon, Nevada had to take the blame. They didn't know what to take the blame for, but they took the blame for it.
So what was your role during the flights? Were you there for most of them?
I was there. No, I didn't. I was there physically. I was there right toward the end of it. I was participating while I was on the NASA high range. We had what we called the Seven Sisters, and the way this worked, anytime there's going to have an A-12 flight, we had someone from FAA was there, and we had someone from Air Defense Command was there. And FAA would notify all your flight centers that there's going to be something flying today above 60,000 feet. Do not report it. Do not say anything. And they do the same thing with the Air Defense Command radar sites in the region. We had 6 radar air defense sites in this region of western United States, and my site at Beatty, which was 65 miles from Area 51, that was the NASA site. And they would notify us of a flight, and we would monitor it, but we wouldn't say anything. In case something happened to the plane or something, we would know where it's at if it went down or something. So we did lose some planes, and but we were called the Seven Sisters, and very few people knew about that we even existed. But it made sense that that they would notify the radar sites. You don't see something flying, they just keep your mouth shut.
Was the process getting it back to the plane back to Area 51 just a reverse mission, or would it go directly back to Area 51?
It come back. It go on a test flight, just make this big circle, come back and land.
How many pilots actually were qualified and flew in missions in the A-12?
Okay, we started out with 12 pilots. 3 of them, or one of them saw the plane. None of them saw what they were going to be flying until they opened the hangar door. And one of them saw it, and he said, "I'm not going to fly that." He turned around and left. Resigned from what they did was sheep dipped them out of the Air Force. We called it sheep dipping, but they resigned their commission and went to work out on a contract for the CIA. And anytime they wanted to, they could drop out and go back to flying in the Air Force. And they, one of them, he said, "No way." And then 2 others, one of the others just flunked out. He just never could handle flying the plane, and they flunked him out. And the third one, he waited until he got Mark III certified. The minute he didn't show up again. He thought he was going to be able to get a high-paying job with Lockheed or someone like that. And consequently, because of what he did, no one would hire him. He really messed up. But so that ended up, we had 9 of them. And we lost Walt Ray was a little short pilot. And he was uncomfortable in the A-12. His head just hit the bottom of the headrest, and he modified. He put a board under it, and he was on a test flight. And we never did know what happened. He took on fuel at Albuquerque, and he was just a few minutes out from being home at the Groom Lake, and he ran out of fuel. And he had to punch out, and when he did, it worked. You jettison out, your seat jettisoned out, and you had stirrups on your boots, and they would suck your legs in, and we had an apparatus that sucked your arms in so you wouldn't lose any limbs. For that Mark III, you got a pretty good draft up there. Anyway, then when you get down to 14,000 feet, the seat would push you out, and then this parachute would open, and you just come on down in the parachute. And his parachute jammed against that board, and the seat couldn't push him out, and he rode the seat all the way to the ground.
Wow. So when they ejected like that, how many G's were they experiencing, do you think?
Ooh, I don't know. That's a good question. It was pretty drastic. And we had, we had 3 different bailouts at speed like that. We had Walt Ray was one of them, and then we had Ken Collins built out one at Wendover, Nevada. He was inverted in clouds, and he had what it was, he got some ice into the one of the sensors, and it was getting a faulty reading, and he thought he was crashing. And he's in clouds, couldn't see where he's at. He's upside down, so he punched out. And then we had one that was actually the mothership we got with the D-21, M-21 drone. We were launching a drone at Mach 3 to fly over China. And the drone launched okay, and then it had what we call an unstart. The engine lost thrust, and it slammed back into the mothership. And it disintegrated, and the pilot lived. Actually, the backseater lives in it as well, but he drowned in the ocean. And we don't know whether he was injured or get into his life raft, or whether he panicked and opened his face mask on his helmet too quickly. Anyway, he drowned, and we lost him. And then we had another one. He was a Lockheed test pilot. Actually, this was in SR-71. It disintegrated over 4 corners in New Mexico. And he came to. He was still in his seat, and the seat was broken, and the parachute had actually opened. And when he came to, he was wearing the seat, but the parachute was open, and he almost landed on some antelope right in a pasture right outside of Albuquerque. But that was 3 different ones that I know of where they launched at full speed. And then we lost Jack Weeks when this Operation Black Shield was our operation over Southeast Asia. And the program was over. We were coming home, and we had an engine overheat in this plane, so they swapped out the engine, and Jack took it up for a fundamental test flight, make sure it was okay before he headed home with it. And he just flat disappeared. We never heard from him or the plane again. We had the telemetry on the plane. We called it Bird Watcher. And so we knew the health of the plane and the pilot. And whatever happened so fast that we got 3 chirps on the Bird Watcher, and that was it. Never heard from him again.
So what part of the world was he over when you lost that plane?
He was close to the Philippines. He was making a circle, flew out of Cadena and was flying over close to the Philippines, and we just lost him.
So how many A-12s did we produce? How many flew missions, and how many did we lose?
Let's see, we built 18. I think there was 18 of them. We converted 3 of them to YF-12s. We converted 2 to motherships for the drone. And we got 9 left. We got 9 in museums now. So we lost 1, 2. We lost 3. We lost 4. We lost Mel Vonovich had one that crashed on the runway at Area 51.
So what qualities did you have to have that made you a candidate for these highly technical and classified high-altitude aircraft missions?
The pilots were chosen. They all had to be fighter pilot experience. They had all flown F-84s primarily, and F-101s was popular at the time. And so they were all pretty well. They were recommended to be the top of their class or their field by different commanders. And it's kind of interesting how they weeded them out. The CIA did all the processing, and of course the guys be called in. They said, we got a classified program that you might be interested in, and they'd go back to Washington and they'd go to some little motel or some little place for their interviews. They had no idea who was interviewing them or what it was for. Most of them thought they were being interviewed to be astronauts. And they'd give them all sorts of tests, and then if they passed that, then they called back in for another interview. And then they'd finally offer them the job. So we got a highly classified job we'd like for you to have you fly. And they say, well, where is it? We can't tell you. What will I be flying? They said, we can't tell you. And so those that did accept, they sent them then before they, actually got the job. They sent them to the Lovelace clinic in Albuquerque, the same ones where all the astronauts went for their checkouts. And they had to pass all their clinical tests at the clinic there, and that's what got them in.
So what type of staging protocol were there for the pilots? Did they just keep them in a bunker in Area 51 waiting for a mission? How did that work?
No, we stayed out there. We'd go out there on Monday morning, come home Friday night. Now the pilots, they were a little more liberal with them. They let them. All of them were living in California. They were at that time the permanent party people, like the pilots and some of them. The pilots and the contractors could not live in the state of Nevada. The only ones of us that could live here in this state were, you might say, the cadre or the permanent party people, or the CIA people, and the cooks and people like that. But everybody else, and they still do it today. They still commute. They have quite a workforce out there now that does live in Las Vegas. But they, all your contractors and stuff still had to be out of state. But back then, even the pilots had to live in around March Air Force Base or somewhere like that.
When they were out there in Area 51 and waiting for a mission, was it downtime? Were they training? How was their time spent? Was it all work?
They flew almost every day. Like I said, we flew 2,850 mission. All the pilots, even those that weren't the A-12 pilots, said that was the best gentlemen's flying club they ever attended. We had all kind of planes for them to fly. We had the F-101s that they could take flight. That even had a civilian plane, and we had helicopters out there, so they could fly just about any time they wanted to. But they were flying almost every day, training flights. So they got a lot of flying time in. And of course, we had what we called House 6, which was one of the duplexes that they converted into a bar for the poker games and that sort of thing. So we made our own entertainment out there.
Was there a procedure for getting permission from other countries during a flyover, or did you just fly over?
We did notify, when we went to Kadena, we did notify our friendly countries there that we were going to be flying some flights out of Kadena. And it's kind of funny, our own Air Force didn't know too much about us, but the Russians did. They had a trawler sitting right off the end of the runway at their Kadena. Every time one of our flights would take off, the Russians would radio ahead to Hanoi that here they come. Give the Vietnamese the heads up that we were coming. And before we played games with them, they didn't know how many planes we had, because we'd change the numbers on them every now and then and do a different paint job, that sort of thing, to make them think we had a whole fleet of planes, but we just had 3 of them there.
So the information and the data that you obtained on Project Palladium, I would imagine that got incorporated into these missions. Did these missions change? Did technology change from mission to mission, or after several missions, did technology change on these planes to make them fly different or have a different signature?
Not that so much. We had pretty good ECM system on the A-12, and and we made about 90% stealth. There's no way we could hide 80,000 pounds of fuel or the temperature, because windshield get up to 800 degrees or better. And we had one place air intake get up to 2,200 degrees. It got hot, so there's no way we could hide the plane completely. But what really changed technology-wise is when we realized that the Russians had this radar. We made our own radar, just like it, our own prototype out at the area, and then we started acquiring other. This was where I came in. I was a so-called expert on Soviet radar, had become, and during the 6-Day War, Israel, when they were fighting all the Arabs and the Syria and what have you, they got their hands on all kinds of Russian radar equipment. And as well as the MiG planes that we ended up with at Area 51, and so we got our hands on all that kind of stuff. So we had all kind of Soviet radar sets out at Area 51 that we were using, particularly with as we progress into stealth. So we need to see what they were seeing for ourselves. So we'd use their radars to track whatever we're tracking to see if they could see it. And so yes, technology did change, and that's what helped make Area 51 a continuous enterprise. It was temporary at that time. U-2 should have been the end of it if Lockheed hadn't got the A-12 contract. Area 51 probably wouldn't even exist. But when the same company got the other contract, they said, well, we're already familiar with it, Area 51, and we already got a little bit of stuff out there. Let's build up the base or the facility. We didn't call it the base. The facility to handle the A-12, and then toward the end of the A-12, that's when we got our hands on the Soviet MiGs, and they were shooting us down left and right in Vietnam. We didn't know why, and they figured out why, so we got our hands on a MiG-21 and started flying it out there. And we tore that. What we did a technical evaluation first. We tore it down to see how they built it. And then we put it back together, and we started flying it, and the Navy and the Air Force would both come in and fly against it, using L4s or whatever everything in their inventory. And we embarrassed first the Navy came in. On the first try, we got 100% kill against the Navy pilots. And within 2 months, they had started red flag weapons school. They realized immediately it wasn't a plane that was shooting them down, and the fact that we'd send their pilots into the war zone with no training. And we figured out that if we could give our pilots, it'd take them 10 missions in the war zone to learn enough that they might survive the war. And we decided, let's give them those 10 missions in Nevada and then send them to war. So that's what came out of the MiG program. And it took the Air Force about 2 more years before they got wise enough and started the red flag exercises. And that was for the same purpose. But what it did with the Navy, and it did the same thing with the Air Force, it immediately reversed the kill ratio in Vietnam. It was 9-1 against us. And we totally turned it around. And now you think about it, we hadn't lost a plane in air-to-air combat in many wars. We just don't lose planes anymore in air-to-air.
Let me ask you a question. I want a radar question again. What did the A-12 look like on radar? What did the Soviets think they were looking at?
It just looked smaller. It was hard to detect, but their problem with A-12, they could track it once it got overhead, but like I said, it's too late. So even when they shoot the missiles up at them, sometimes the missiles would miss it, but they would lock onto the plane and just circle, and then they got close enough to the plane because they could outrun the A-12. But once they got close enough, the proximity fuse would detonate the warhead, and the warhead couldn't catch the plane. The plane would outrun the debris or the explosion coming from the warhead. The only way they could ever we had one Blackbird, this includes SR-71s, that ever got contacted by a missile, and that was Dennis Sullivan in one of the A-12s, landed at Kadena and had a little bit of fragment that was embedded in the wing that he had brought back with him. And what they're doing is shooting the missiles up ahead of it and hoping they'd run into some of the debris.
They're that fast.
It was that fast, yes.
Wow. So if you would lose one of those planes or any of these high altitude planes, what was that like? And was there a scramble to obtain engineering data while you're still trying to cover up the crash?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Anytime we had a plane, well, I'll give you an example. Kenny Collins' plane that when he did the inverted bailout up at Wendover, a couple of ranchers saw it coming down this parachute, and they drove up in the pickup. They already had his canopy in the back of the pickup, and they asked if he needed help with helping you out with the parachute. They said, "We'll take you back to the plane." He said, "God, no, that's the F-105 with the atomic bomb on board." So the CIA is notorious for taking care of business when it comes to something like that. They gave the guy $25,000 a piece and told him to forget they'd ever seen it. And one of our planes had to sit down in Thailand as Frank Murray was flying it, and he got an indication he lost the oil pressure on one of his engines. And they could fly okay on one engine. And the only people they talked to was their tanker. They didn't, they maintained radio silence. But he called his tanker and said, "I'm in trouble. I've lost one engine." So the tanker radioed ahead to this one air base in Thailand and notified them we got declaring an emergency, and they wanted to know if they wait a little bit. So we got a squadron of F-105 getting ready to head out on a sortie. So they said, "No, we're coming right in." They said, "Well, how far out?" "Well, we're 20 miles. "How many on board?" "One." "Well, what kind of plane is this?" "They can't tell you." And anyway, we landed there. Of course, the CIA panicked. They had one of their planes down in a foreign country. And we actually shipped 55 people on planes headed to Thailand. We brought spare engines. We brought everything. We didn't know what the problem was. And we tried to hide the plane. Well, it was kind of funny. He had to keep that one engine running because that was his air conditioning in his flight suit. And a Thai colonel came out and Frank said, "No, go get me an American officer." So he went and got an American colonel, and he came out. He got a step ladder and climbed up to where they got the canopy open. And the first thing Frank did was made him sign a statement, non-disclosure statement. And what this did to that colonel, he was never able to fly another mission in Vietnam because he had seen something he wasn't supposed to see. If he got shot down, he could talk about it. Anyway, they hid Frank. They hid the plane took about 3 days, and they determined that it was just a sensor. It wasn't really the engine. There was nothing wrong with the engine, so they run a wire from the engine along the side of the fuselage and into the instrument panel so he could fly it back. And so he flew back with the tanker, and they used the tanker's call sign. We call it buddy flight. And they actually had the Dodge B-52s coming in to bomb North Vietnam. They were dodging them, so Americans, even our American pilots, would not see that Blackbird. It's still that secret.
That's amazing. So one of my questions was, you already answered this, and it was, why was the A-12 so short-lived? Was it just a year? Was it a year and a half? How long did they use the A-12?
It went operational in 1967, and it less than a year. It flew to 29 missions, and the Air Force was notorious for taking over. They took over our U-2s too, which is another story. But for some reason, the president wanted, General May in particular, wanted the Air Force to be flying the surveillance planes. And so once they got the SRs, the only reason they ever deployed the A-12 is because the SR said the ones didn't have their engines ready yet. Otherwise, the A-12 never would have flown operationally. They had actually canceled the program at one time and had to call everyone back in because the SR said the ones weren't ready. And it's kind of funny, when they landed at Kadena, their Air Force guys look up and they could see the A-12s up in this hangar, and they didn't know who in the world is that. And they didn't have the need to know, so they didn't know it's CIA. And they called them Brand X. And it's kind of funny today when we were around the SR-71 guys, we called the SR-71 the family model. And it claims all the speed records and altitude records, but in real life, the A-12 flew much higher and faster than the SR-71, but because it was remained secret for another 30 years, it never was able to claim the records. But when they put the second man in the plane, the A-12 had one man. Put that second man in SR-71, they lost 5,000 feet of altitude.
Wow.
Just from the weight of the man and the life support system that they had put in there.
So how high could that A-12 fly when it was almost empty of fuel?
Right at 90,000.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Our limitation, the engine, the engine could have flown us faster. Heat was our limitation. We didn't have any known metal or even composites then that could handle the heat generated just by the plane at those speeds. So you go from a Mach 2.5 plane, it gets up to about 450 degrees. But at Mach 3, it jumped. I mean, it jumped up, like I said, up the intake, you got to 2,200. And a lot of places, probably average around 1,100 degrees. Depending on the edges of it, the chimes and stuff. We actually had to use composites rather than titanium, just because of the heat.
So would it continually gain altitude as it lost fuel?
Oh yeah, it'd go faster and gain altitude. And it was kind of amusing when they would have to fuel up, the tanker would be going just as fast as he could possibly go. And
Yeah, I bet.
A-12's up there wobbling like a baby duck. He's barely able to stay in the air.
So what speed was its optimal flying speed? What speed could it react and do exactly what you wanted to?
2,200 miles an hour was the speed. It didn't like anything but that. They didn't fly in anything but it always flew an afterburner. And on one time that we know of, that Dennis Sullivan was coming back in and wanted to kill some time on a flight, and he just curious what speed it maintained without the afterburner, and he was surprised he didn't lose very much speed by going into that out of the afterburner. But what's amazing is the A-12 generated about 40% of its speed was from the intakes, not the output of the engine.
So as it's flying and it's losing fuel and it's gaining altitude, what's the plan there? I mean, what's the critical point where you need to start taking that thing down?
They would have a flight plan. They always maintain the CIA would issue a flight plan. They had on a mission. They had to stay above 80,000 feet. If they blow that, you'd abort the mission because you just weren't taking any chances on losing the plane. But they would maintain. They'd maintain. They get a little bit faster, but the pilots are pretty good about it, keeping it at 2,200 miles an hour.
So were there lots of technical glitches back then that made them turn around? I mean, I know you had sensors and I know you had lights. What was that like? Were they constantly turning around, or was it pretty successful once you got them up there? It
was a very successful plane. The A-12 had problems that the SR-71 didn't have, and that was what we called unstarts. When you'd be flying along as you're getting up to speed, and you'd about 2,800 miles an hour, it'd be going just as smooth as can be, and all of a sudden the engine would lose thrust. It's still running, but it's just not putting out any power. And so the one engine, it slammed your head against the canopy at a big time. I mean, and that's what broke up Bill Weaver's plane. It actually broke up because it survived a slam when it did that. But that was what you had to do is slow your air down. It was coming in at supersonic, and it had to go into compressor subsonic. So you had to slow the air down coming into the engine. And that was what the problems was. And we was using mechanical operated devices to slow it down. And we finally went to electrical, and that solved the problem. The SR-71s never had that problem.
So how long did it take to prepare a pilot to get in the cockpit?
Not really long. It was a very easy plane to fly. All the pilots would say that. we had a trainer, and some might be interesting to your listeners. We've had people claim that they flew the SR-71 for the CIA and all that kind of stuff. But no Air Force pilot ever flew the operational CIA planes. Period. They flew the trainer, but not the one-seaters. And no CIA ever flew the SR-71. And the SR-71 never flew at Area 51. And a lot of misconceptions. People just don't know, but that's the way it was. But the way it worked, the Lockheed test pilots would train the instructor pilots, which were Air Force, and they would train them in the trainer plane. We called it the Titanium Goose. And then the Air Force instructor pilots then would train the CIA pilots in the trainer. But no one but the agency pilots ever flew the one-seaters.
So the pilots basically they wore a pressure suit and a space-like helmet when they're in the cockpit.
Yeah, absolutely. They had to have that for their air conditioning and then for their the high altitude, and even the U-2 pilots. Without the pressure suits. We lost that one U-2 pilot. The Russians shot him down over Cuba. He died because it punctured the suit, and it makes your blood boil at that altitude.
So were the controls and instruments inside the cockpit made simpler because the pilots were wearing spacesuits and of the manipulation of instruments with heavy gloves?
It wasn't that much different. The joystick was glove friendly, but not that much different. It's surprising that you thought they would, but the instruments were pretty antiquated compared with what they are today. But it was pretty well automated. Even for its time, it was amazing. Everything was built with slide rules. We didn't have computers back then, and and the A-12 was still the fastest flying and highest flying plane ever built. And there'll probably never be another manned flight that will surpass that. There's no need for them. And first of all, and second of all, the heat problem is still the same problem today as we had back then.
So if A-12 pilots were CIA, did they have ranks similar to the Air Force, or were they? What did you call these CIA pilots? No,
they were. They had no ranks, and CIA doesn't have. You've probably seen the Roadrunners. That's all the people who worked at Area 51 programs. They got the Roadrunner patch. They had a signals patch that the pilots wore. Those were homemade. The Air Force guys always got to have a patch, but the CIA doesn't have patches, and they don't have units. And so
they were just pilots.
They were just pilots, and we called them drivers.
Really?
The CIA called them drivers. They weren't called pilots. And so technically, Area 51 was never a base until just recent years. It was just a facility, and so the CIA would call them drivers. They each had a Dutch number. I don't know where Dutch came from, but Frank Murray was Dutch 21. I think Ken called them Dutch 23. They all had a Dutch number, and the planes were called articles, and they had an article number. So if you're talking about, for example, Frank Murray, and it'd be Dutch 21 and article 121. So you knew exactly who was flying and what plane it was.
Wow, that's amazing.
And the cameras were called packages. Everything had a code name and cover story. That was just part of the game. For example, the pilots didn't use their real names, or a lot of people didn't. They used pseudonames that the CIA got on for gravestones in Europe. And that's the names the guys used. And you'll see on the accident reports and stuff, it didn't use their real names. And a lot of us that worked out there didn't necessarily have full names like they did. We had code names. Like my code name was Thunder. And that's easier for our customers to remember us by. We had to use a code name rather than our regular name.
So what changed in 1964? You started working for NASA. How different was that? I mean, you're involved in combat. You're involved in, well, sort of combat. You're getting shot at. Your product is in the air getting shot at, and then all of a sudden you're working for NASA in 1964. Did it feel like you were slowing down, or did things just speed up?
No, NASA. I have to confess that everyone says that Area 51 was the best duty they ever had. Wasn't for me. The NASA high range was. Of course, I'm an energetic guy. I got to stay busy. But the NASA high range was so exciting. We were flying the X-15. Everything that was going to go to the moon on Apollo, we tested it first in the X-15. And it was a workhorse. And you know, the hydraulic systems or whatever it was, we would test it, and every flight was a nail biter. A lot of times it worked, and sometimes it didn't. And then we were doing the Mach 3 XB-70 was just coming online, and we were test flying it. They were doing what we call lifting bodies, which became the space shuttle. We would launch those off of B-52 just like we did the X-15, and they'd zoom up in the fringes of outer space and then come back in and land at Edwards. And you know, they didn't have wings. We call the one flying bathtub. I don't know if you may not remember the old movie series, these $6 million man with Lee Major.
Oh yeah. I remember that video right at the beginning there. I know what you're talking about.
That's the real thing. Colonel Bruce Peterson was flying that, and he got distracted by a helicopter as he's coming in, and didn't get his landing gear locked in time, and it buckled on him, and he went rolling out across the desert, 200 mile an hour or so. And he had to have a lot of plastic surgery done, and that's where they got the takeoff.
He survived that?
Yeah, he did.
Wow.
Yeah, he did.
So was that at Area 51?
No, that happened at Edwards.
So were you working at Area 51 for NASA, or where was that?
No. I was on a tracking station 65 miles from Area 51.
Gotcha.
And we would track the stuff out of Area 51. We would be told, we got something we want you to track today. And see, being a NASA radar site tracking the X-15, we had something that the Air Defense Command radar site didn't have, and that was the capability of recording velocity. We had a velocity computer that so we could tell what speed we're going, and that's where we came in. Even with the A-12, it was being advanced by Lockheed through the Mach 1, Mach 2, and Mach 3 stages. They would contact me. We got a plane. We want you to track today and record its velocity. Of course, they wouldn't say what it was, but I would record its velocity, and then they'd pick up the recording, and that was the verification they needed that it had passed that stage.
So at when you were with NASA, what were you still a CIA employee? Were you a contractor there?
I was actually a contractor. All of my work for the CIA was actually contract. But once you ever get in, they know where you're at. They know where you live. And kind of a long story. I had that little deal with them while I was at Fort Sill, and I was still in the Army, and I actually activated with the first Combat Hawk missile unit that we deployed during the Iron Curtain, and we went to Germany. And I hadn't been over there but 15 months. The CIA came knocking on my door, wanting me to. They tried to recruit me even while I was in the Army at Fort Bliss, but they wanted me to go back to work for them. And put it this way, I was supposed to be over there for 36 months, and I spent 18 months over there. And me and the family one day was on a plane heading back to the United States to go to work for the CIA, but it's still a contract work. But that's where I ended up on the X-15 site, because they had their finger in everything that's going on, particularly ramjets and that sort of thing, because the CIA was really, really into this stealth and all of that. They advanced all of that stuff. It wasn't the Air Force or anyone else. It was the CIA that advanced all our technology in that direction.
So on these NASA test flights, when you're testing these lifting bodies, and you, like you said, every test was a nail biter. How different were these pilots than the pilots you'd been working with that were flying the A-12?
I had to admit I respect test pilots a lot more than the guys that following their footsteps, because they're the one that takes all the chances. I'll give you an example. Hank Myers, of course, a good friend of mine, and he was one of the instructor pilots for the Air Force for the U-2 guys. in 1955. And he used to tell me, he said, every time we'd take a flight, we'd break the world's altitude record, and we couldn't tell him one. And we didn't, in those days, we didn't have any flight manuals on these planes. We didn't have any simulators. And they'd go back in, they'd go up and they'd come back down and say, man, don't try this. It'll get this. So they learned about seat their pants. And that's common with all these test pilots. We flew, talking about Area 51, we flew all kind of weird stuff out there that was technology demonstrators or proof of concept of vehicles to develop something else, like the B-2 bomber. We developed what we called the whale. That was the weirdest looking thing you ever saw. And it was a fly-by-wire type plane, and that developed it developed the B-2 bomber and a lot of our other technology, even into your cruise missiles, this sort of thing. So we're flying some really weird stuff out there, never intending for it to go operational. But like I said, it's just a proof of concept. The Have Blue, we built 2 of those that became the F-117 bomber. And we crashed both of those. We buried them at Area 51. But they became the 117. And so we had a lot of, and the bird of prey, it developed a lot of stealth technology. So we were testing a lot of stuff, weird stuff out there.
So when these pilots would go to do these NASA missions, what was the mood when they're getting into these test vehicles? I mean, was it noticeably different from an A-12 mission?
Not at all. I got to say this about all the pilots. Our offset test pilots, they were so calm and collected. Now, on the NASA high range, we always had one of a test pilot sitting at the control console, so he could talk to the pilot that's in the air. Because we had all kind of crap would go wrong. The radio, my cockpit's full of ammonia. I can't see. I can't do this. And the pilot on the ground is all butch. That always happens. Do this, do that, and they'd keep them calm. They'd calm the pilots down and get them home. That was it. But we had one very tragic. I'll never forget this. We had Mike Adams. I think he hadn't been with us about 4 years, and he was going to make astronaut on that day. Anytime they flew over 50 miles up, they became astronauts. And we actually in the X-15 we made 8 guys astronauts in the X-15. But anyway, he was going up, and it was going to be a big day for him. And so we had his wife and his mother. They lived down at Lancaster, close to Edwards. Had them there in the control room to witness him make an astronaut. And on the way up, he got vertigo, and he said, my instruments are screwed up. And we're tracking him on the ground, and he's okay. We can't see anything wrong. He's right on trajectory, right where he's supposed to be. And he kept saying, my instruments screwed up. Something's going wrong here. And anyway, he went into a flat spin. We couldn't tell he's spinning yet, but he could. And bottom line is he re-entered the atmosphere. He went into fringed outer space, re-entered the atmosphere crossways. And wow. His plane just disintegrated. But we recognized he's in trouble, thank God, in time to get his wife and mother out of the control room at Edwards so that they didn't witness his death. But I mean, that was horrible. And then, of course, I lost one of my best friends, Joe Walker. The mid-air collision we had with the XB-70 and his F-104. And we lost a lot of good people in those days. But like Mel, Lou Shock, that flew the first flight of the A-12 out of the area. He actually was, while they were getting ready for the flight, he was leaning back on the sunny side of the hangar. He actually went to sleep. They had to wake him up and get him to go get in the plane. These guys were calm. I mean, I've never heard one of those pilots panicked as they were going in, knowing they were going to die. They would still be giving us scientific data all the way to the ground.
Where did they find these guys? How do they even find these guys?
They're just so trained that it's reflexes. They spend so much training that they don't even have to think what to do. It's just a natural thing for them to do. It's just they're just different that way. I won't say the brainwashed, but it's just they automatically know what to do, and that's so different from the pilots today, particularly scary in your commercial airlines and stuff. We don't have pilots anymore. We've got system managers. They're managing computers, and if something goes wrong, they don't know what to do.
What was the procedure, when you were working for the CIA at Area 51? What's the procedure for getting a job there? Is it different for contractors? Is it different for CIA? Was it just CIA there at the time, or was there Air Force there?
The Air Force worked entirely for CIA. That was one thing, but the U-2 program and A-12 both the Air Force, their role was to fly the chase planes for us and maintain the base itself or the facility. They mowed the lawn, made sure we had water, cooks, that's what, just like any military base today, your base commander is nothing more than the mayor of the base. And, he got a lot of people that outranked him on the base, but he's in charge of the operations of the base. Well, that was the purpose of the Air Force, but they were not allowed to report up to chain of command because one reason CIA had the job was the Air Force, you got a chain of command, and the CIA does it. And the Air Force could have some general come in and say, I want, pull rank, I want to know what you're doing. And the way it's set up, it didn't matter what rank you were. If you didn't have a need to know, you didn't get in, period. Even a congressman, if he wasn't cleared with the need to know, he didn't get in there.
When working there, did you and the employees refer to that place as Area 51 when you're working there?
Not really. We didn't use it. You didn't really call it. We call it the ranch. It had different names depending on who was there. The MiG guys called it Red Square. It became Dreamland with the stealth, the Have Blue. It was Watertown for the U-2 guys. So, but we really didn't talk about it. But we worked together. And one thing when they recruited us. The recruited guys, there's just 23 guys in the special projects, and we all either had a boat on Lake Mead here at Las Vegas, or we had a cabin on Mount Charleston, which is a mountain not very far from Las Vegas with pine trees and all. And we had something in common to talk about all week long as we worked up there. So we worked together, and then we'd come home on the weekends. We played together. The wives would have all the chores done where it was just a vacation when we came home. In my case, we had a cabin cruiser out on Lake Mead, and we immediately headed for the lake. And then all of the guys I worked with that had boats, we had our own little special cove that we would go to, and we played together all weekend. But the wives didn't like to associate outside of their group because they didn't know where we worked. They didn't know what we were doing. And someone asked them, them were the kids, what's your husband do or what's your dad do? They had to make up a lie. They didn't know. It was embarrassing. And we were so security conscious because we was always afraid that you're going to try to get to us through our families.
Right.
So we just never talked when we came home. Even the guys, we just didn't talk about it. And particularly later on, when other projects started moving in, even my group would have different customers. We call them customers. And maybe one guy would be working on something for the Navy, and another guy for the Air Force, or maybe some university. And a lot of times you didn't know who you was doing it for. And you just didn't ask. You didn't need to know. But we'd help each other, and you knew basically what the other guy was doing, but you didn't go in and say, hey, who are you doing this for? Or how does it work? Or, that sort of thing. And so even to this day when we get together, there's some areas we don't go into because we don't know about what it might still be classified. And we just didn't, it just kind of inbred into us that you just don't talk if it hadn't been declassified.
So what's the feeling you get working there? Is it bigger than life or just another technical top secret job?
It was just another job. And we check ourselves, so all of us do now. That we don't. Someone asked for photographs. We didn't take photographs back then. And I'll give you an example. This is while I was on there 15. I lived in Beatty, little bitty town, 125 miles north of Las Vegas. And one Friday, the X-15 engine didn't ignite, so it had to land. We always launched it off the B-52 over a dry lake bed, just in case it's an emergency. And on that dry lake bed, we had doctors, we had ambulances, we had all kind of people, support people, responders there in case something happened. But anyway, he didn't launch, and so he landed. He was able to land the plane, without an engine. Well, they picked the plane up and put it on a flatbed trailer, and they got to Beatty. This is on Friday evening, and over the weekend, California didn't allow trucks to cross Death Valley, which they'd have to cross to get back to where they're going. So the X-15 stood in my driveway all weekend on the back of the flatbed. I didn't take a single photograph. Not a single photograph. And I get so mad at myself. We didn't even, no big deal back then. It just was. And the same way with the Air 51, it just really wasn't. We didn't realize, now as we let things back on, my God, what we were doing. Back then, it just wasn't that big a deal.
I can't even imagine. That's the ultimate vehicle that I don't think anybody's had a more impressive vehicle in their driveway in the history of the country.
I know did. We all live there in town. There's 10 of us on the radar side. But a single photograph taken of that thing. And we didn't take photographs of each other or anything back then. But of course, the NASA project wasn't classified. I still had my clearance because I went there right straight out of the Army. And the agency made sure I kept a clearance so I could handle their secret flights. But I was on, that was kind of a side deal. NASA wasn't really fully aware of all of that. They knew we were doing a little thing on the side, but they didn't want to know. And
when you're moving around Area 51, is there a protocol for working in a particular area so you don't stray into an area you don't have clearance for? Is it? You
just didn't go. We didn't allow people into our building, and they didn't try to come in. Even at the mess hall, we were segregated there by choice. You didn't have to be. More so when it grew larger. When it's just ox cart, it's different. It wasn't that bigger deal. But when we got the Soviet MiGs in and started doing the stealth programs, the ox cart guys didn't have a need to know. They couldn't even come in our building, even though we were still on their program. And and we flew up separately. We didn't fly up with any of the Air Force. No one flew on our flights except special projects. And then there's 5 of us that were kind of special, and we actually flew up on the Queen Air that we kept out at McCarran Air Force Base. McCarran International. We had a little block building out on the end of the runway with chain link fence around it. We kept a Queen Air inside of it, and we just go in a little side gate, parked on the street outside of the airport, push the plane out, hop aboard to take off, without saying a word, and fly over the Sheep Mountains into Area 51. And so that was kind of neat, having your own private plane.
So we were talking about earlier about different projects. So they had, I don't know if they called it Project Donut, Have Drill, and Have Ferry. So we had at least 3 aircraft that we obtained from the Soviet Union. What other aircraft did the U.S. government have, and how many did they have out there?
Back then, it was only the MiGs. We got the MiG-21.
So there's 3 of those?
Yeah. One MiG-21 and 2 MiG-17s. We got the MiG-21 first. The Iraqi defected with a brand new, had 125 hours on it.
Wow.
MiG-21 defected to Israel, and Israel loaned it to us to run our evaluations on it. And I'll tell you a funny story of that later. And then a year later, during the 6-Day War, 2 Syrians landed on the wrong airstrip. They landed on the Israeli airstrip instead of theirs. So we got our hands on 2 MiG-17s that ended up out at the area as well. But in those days, that's all we had. But our big thing then was we were collecting the Soviet radar systems and this sort of thing, because we needed those for our stealth program. And but that's only MiGs. But we started something with the MiG program that continued. We got so much benefit out of changing the kill ratio that it was something that continued. And same way, I think we developed Area 51. I like to think that we developed it into a technological laboratory. It's where you come in and evaluate different systems and aircraft, that sort of thing.
Did the Soviets ever attempt, or did you ever hear of an attempt to infiltrate the borders and try to scuttle their aircraft?
No, he was there. It's funny. Our own Air Force didn't know he was there, but or what we were doing, and he was there. But the Russians basically knew. So we had the A-12 prototype, and we first started out with a prototype, and then the real thing on the pylon, or what we call the pole, out on the dry lake bed, looking at it with all this radar while we're doing our stealth programs. And every time a Russian would launch a satellite that was flying overhead, well, we would know what type it was. Our intelligence was just as good as theirs. And if it's an infrared seeking satellite, but we just turn off all the radar and all the radios until it was gone. But if it's an infrared seeking, we would actually have to take the plane off of the pylon and hide it back in a hangar, which was a major job. And what really hacked us off is we found out years later, the Russians knew all along just exactly what we were testing, because they picked up infrared, had picked up the shadow of the plane still on the heat signature.
Oh yeah, I heard that. Yeah,
on the desert. And we didn't realize that we did a lot of extra work that we shouldn't have done. But yeah, they knew it was there, and they always claimed there's 5 spies in Russia for every one of us. They wanted to know what we was doing, particularly when we got our hands on the MiGs. They knew we had those MiGs, and they needed to know what we were doing with them. And
so did they tear down the aircraft first, or try to learn to fly the thing first?
No, we tore it down first. And I just want to tell you the story. We tore it down and see how they built it, and with some things that stood out was it was a very simple plane. And like the engine was expendable. They get 150 hours on the engine, it blow up on it, they'd throw it away and replace it. Whereas we try to get several thousand hours on ours, and that became a problem with us, gathering up spare parts. But but anyway, but the paint job was very, very superior. They had a very superior paint. And one amusing thing, any place that you didn't see, the rivets, they wouldn't grind them down to the surface like we do. They'd be it'd be just rough as heck. When you take something off, there's all these rivets sticking up. But anyway, we're going to test the MiG-21 that have donuts, and we tied it down with cables and chains so it couldn't take off on us. And so everybody and their dog wanted to watch this engine run, and CIA was out there, the Air Force, everybody. Well, someone noticed these our security badges. We always had hanging on our security badges. We had dosimeters, because we're just outside the atomic testing range. And you have film badges, all kind of crap was hanging on your film badges. Someone noticed these film badges, said, "God, we better gather up these film badges. Someone's liable to get one sucked in the engine." So we gathered them all up, about 25 of them. And I always say we gave them the Gomer Powell. Anyway, that engine's sitting there just screaming, just tugging at the chains, and old Gomer gets right in front of the intake of that thing. Golly, he sucked every one of our badges through the engine. Ding that engine up. We hadn't got to fly the plane yet, and we had to have it back to Israel for 2 months because they were going to use it for some kind of celebration back in Israel. And we'd already screwed up the engine on that pig. And fortunately, some of the Pratt Whitney engine guys there for the A-12s on the Blackbirds hadn't moved out yet, and they tore it down and polished out the dings and stuff, got it operational where we'd go ahead and fly it and get it back to Israel like we promised we'd do.
Any characteristics or design details of the Soviet planes that have been used in U.S. planes?
I don't know of any, but probably yes. They because the plane wasn't really superior except what we got out of the MiG program was in its environment. It was superior to what we had. It could outturn our planes. So if he's at 15,000 feet and 400 knots or so, subsonic, and you don't get him on the first try, you better not try again because he's going to get you. He can outturn you. And that's what the Navy and the Air Force learned. They came into these F-4s and all that kind of stuff that is very much superior planes as far as speed and power. And the planes would outturn them. They'd get them, simulated combat on the first try. And so we learned when to engage and when not to. About what it amounts to. So we can outrun them. Just don't get into a turning match with him, because he's going to outturn you, and he's going to get you. But our biggest problems we had in the Vietnam War, we came out of the Korean War shooting guns and went into the Vietnam War shooting missiles. And the Air Force and Navy both, in their wisdom, decided, well, if we got missiles, we don't need guns. And they forgot that once you shoot your missiles, you don't have any defenses. And it didn't take the enemy long to realize that, so they'd wait till they shot their missiles, and then here they come. You know, you gang up on them. And we lost 15 planes in one day, didn't shoot down a single one.
That seems like a huge mistake.
Oh, it was. It was horrible.
Huh.
And not training their people.
Right. Did the Soviet Union ever possess, or do they possess, any U.S. aircraft intact?
Yeah, they was doing that before we got their MiGs. In fact, the engines in the MiG planes were Rolls-Royce planes that motors that they had. I think Iran gave it to them. Iran was giving the Russians stuff, but they had reverse engineered the Rolls-Royce engines. That's what they're using in the MiG planes. Yeah, they had a lot of stuff that chassis and electronic chassis and stuff. You look at it, and you swear it made in Sunnyvale, California.
So did Israel? Did they basically call us and let us know when they had those planes? How did that work, and how quickly did we get hold of those?
We knew immediately, because we were helping the U2 guys were helping Israel with the intelligence during the 6 Day War. We were swapping intelligence to Israel all along. And once we got our hands on the MiG-21, the first thing they did, this when I left the NASA, they didn't send me directly to Area 51. They sent me to the Wright-Patterson Flight Dynamics Laboratory. And there we designed what we call black boxes that we were going to use on this MiG-21. Because it went to Wright-Patterson first before we got to Area 51, just so we could build up the instruments and stuff that we needed to be able to evaluate it. And we built up these black boxes, and then we brought them out the area. We mounted them in where the missile racks was, usually where we put them. But we had our own instrument panels attached to the plane, so we could see what stress factor and all that kind of stuff.
Any ET aircraft at Area 51?
No. We were the ETs. We got accused of that, and we had a problem. We tried to make. They started spotting the U2. People see it flying 13 miles up in the air, and it would the sun hit it just right, and it would shine, and
that's way up there.
Yeah, people see it, and that was twice as high as any plane was known to fly at that time. And it was a UFO, and so we decided to paint the plane to where it wouldn't shine. And the paint, just the weight of the paint, we lost 1,500 feet of altitude.
Wow.
Just the weight of the paint. Every pound of weight we put in, we lost a foot of altitude. And so then we started. We tried all kind of stealth stuff on the U2 to make them invisible, particularly the radar. And we had piano wire strung on them, everything. We had one we called the Dirty Bird. It did more harm than it did good. So, but the CIA was already into stealth. They said, and they just Dick Bitzel insisted that the next plane would be a stealth plane, and so we went to great lengths with the A-12 to make it a stealth plane. The same way with the little D-21 drone that we developed to fly off of the mothership, and we flew it over China and to detect their missiles or their nuclear sites, and that was quite a story in itself. It wasn't very successful. Originally we built it. We were going to catch it in a net off the back of a C-130. That didn't work out too good. So when they started flying, we designed the drone where it would drop the package in the ocean and would have a ship pick it up. And we finally flew one over China and had a very successful mission. So we'd already crashed some inside of China. They got some of them in their museums. And it dropped this package just like it's supposed to. Everything was just, really going perfect till the captain run over it with the ship and sunk it.
So I know that you probably read about this in the news this past week and the week before, but the U.S. government, the Navy, announcing that they're taking these UFO sightings seriously, and maybe more research needs to go into that. What did you think of that statement? What do you think of that radar footage that a couple of those clips that they had showed of our fighters engaging these objects?
That is a big mystery, and I had the privilege the other day. I was a guest speaker for a group of aerospace the medical society. It was all kinds of doctors and stuff like that. And I was talking to he was a Navy doctor, and he said that we're taking this UFO stuff seriously. He said we are, but not in the sense that they think it's anything extraterrestrial. They think it's they're looking at it from a medical standpoint. Is it something that the pilots are doing that they're seeing something they think they're seeing, or they don't know what it is yet, but they are taking it serious. They as far as what you're talking about that they picked up, there's no telling what that is.
Is that radar that we're looking at in those videos?
Yeah, I would say it is. It doesn't make sense. We don't know what it. We just don't know. I talked to several people, and I've never talked to anyone that believes it's extraterrestrial. They think we've come up with something that's being tested, but why is it being seen?
Exactly.
And that's why they say wanted it seen. Maybe that you never know what's really going on. They may be sending a message, or just recently Russia started bragging about having this Mach 6 vehicle that is flying around, and we got reservations about that because I talked to some Lockheed engineers a while back, and we've given up on trying to build real fast aircraft. We may have some unmanned craft that's pretty fast, but the speed is not the same anymore. We use sensors like the F-22. It's just loaded with sensors. We don't need speed with it. And I don't know if it's the same as the F-35. Some of us got our doubts about the F-35, but the F-22 is a monster as far as its sensors capability. So, but we just don't have any metals that can withstand sustained flight at those speeds, because everything turns cherry red. You've seen, there's 15 wood, and we've seen the Apollo missions and stuff, and even the space shuttle. We know of no metals, and I don't know of anyone that professionally that thinks we've gotten anything extraterrestrial in that regard. We don't know what it is.
Yeah. So just west of Area 51, just a few miles there's a nuclear test range, and it's hugely radioactive. So what was so special about Area 51? They absolutely had to have it there, despite all that risk from that area just to the west.
It didn't have to be there, but it had so many advantages. First of all, they were trying to hide it, so they did what the CIA. It known that the CIA even had the program go, because the U-2 was more highly classified than the Manhattan Project that developed the atomic bomb. I mean, it was a very highly classified program. So NASA, or the National Aeronautics, before NASA, they were the cover story. It was going to be a NASA high altitude research facility. Area 51 was not secret. They advertised in the paper for contractors, everything else. But NASA was the cover story. They were going to do a high altitude research, and the AEC, the Atomic Energy Commission, was going to provide us security, so people couldn't get in there, because they had to go through the Nevada test site, which was highly classified and very secure. So that's the two things they offered. Plus, the lake was close enough to civilization that it made it handy. It was just 85 miles as the crow flies from Las Vegas. So it had all the earmarks of being a perfect place for this. because they needed a place out of sight yet handy, and with all that with protection that the NASA and the Atomic Energy Commission offered.
Did you enjoy your time there?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We had I'd say it was boring in the sense of missions. For example, when we was doing the stealth, they bring in a prototype for us to look at on the pylons, and we look at it with all this radar. We had every radar known to man, and we might not hear from them for another 3 months as they went and worked out the kinks. So this before we had a lot of other projects going on out there. It was boring. We was out there all week long, and but we had all these toys, so we became notorious for. We started doing it with the MiGs. We put them on the pylon just to look at them, see what we'd see, and that was quite interesting. So pretty soon, any plane we get our hand on, we're putting that on the pylon, and it became a project because we realized that we could recognize different signatures. Radar signatures for different planes, and we actually made a project out of it. That came out just out of curiosity of a bunch of guys. We had the toys to do it with and the time to do it. So, we did a lot of stuff like that.
TD, what's the next chapter in your interesting life?
I don't know. I'm so fortunate. As they've been declassifying things, they're still declassifying stuff. The CIA is. And I'm privileged I get to go back there quite often and work with the historians and the air branch, the different ones. And I take pilots back with me and engineers back with us. They're trying to get as much knowledge as they can while they can. And now they're doing the Defense Intelligence Agency doing the same thing. They're just now declassifying their role in all of this. And they played a very major role in the U-2 and the MiG programs in particular. So I get to go back there quite often, and that's fun. And then I got a lot of friends when they come to Vegas. We go out and dinner and that kind of stuff. So it's fun to staying connected and getting to just sit and do like we're doing, just talking. Me and the historians and different ones, and it's fun. I'm having a lot of fun.
It is fun. For those of you who are interested in everything we talked about tonight, you can too purchase any of TD's books at Amazon.com. And we could have easily spent 8 hours talking about all the fascinating points of your truly amazing career. TD Barnes, thank you so much for a great evening, and thank you for being on the podcast.
Well, thank you, Cam. It was fun. I enjoyed it.
My Alien Life Podcast.
You can find my website at www.myalienlifepodcast.com, and please subscribe to my latest downloads at iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and at podbean.com. And please follow me and like me on Facebook and Twitter. My Alien Life is written and produced for broadcast at Studio 254 in the Northern Rocky Mountains. The music you are hearing is produced and created by Elion. You can find all Elion's work online at Heart Dance Records.